At 7 in the morning, when my doorbell shrieked through the house like a smoke alarm, I thought it was a package, maybe parts for a brake job, so I stumbled to the front door in a worn t-shirt, hair wrecked, caffeine still a theory, and instead of cardboard, I found 2 deputies from the Brookfield County Sheriff's Office, clipboards ready, posture stiff, one of them starting in that official tone, "Sir, we're here with a complaint about HOA violations and possible harassment." And before I could even process how my own driveway had become a crime scene, the universe decided to flip the script, because right then my wife, Detective Lieutenant Laura Cole, stepped out behind me, full uniform, badge bars catching the pale morning light, steam curling from her coffee mug into the cold air. The silence that dropped over the porch was almost funny. No birds, no engines, just the tiny crunch of gravel as one deputy instinctively stepped back, eyes flicking between his paperwork and Laura's nameplate, realizing that whatever story the HOA president had sold them had left out one crucial detail. The guy they were here to warn was married to a decorated detective. And this was not some clueless troublemaker's house. This was our home. That frozen moment, that shift from authority to embarrassment, is burned into my memory. But to understand how we got there, you have to go back 6 months, to the day my life cracked open. My name is Ethan Cole, I'm 45, and half a year before those deputies showed up, I was getting carved up in a divorce that weaponized an HOA like a sniper rifle. My ex filed noise complaints if I started my work truck at 7 a.m., had me written up for improper holiday lighting because my Christmas lights weren't the right shade of warm white, scheduled emergency meetings exactly when I had custody, until she walked away with the big house, the Mercedes, and a chunk of my savings, and I walked away with a vow chiseled into my bones. Never again would I live under another HOA. I'd sleep in a shipping container first. That vow is how I found the old farmhouse at 2190 Hawthorne Lane. A century-old place with 2.3 acres, wooden floors that complained like old men, a detached garage that smelled of motor oil and honest work, a porch where a man could drink a beer at noon without a committee judging his grass. The realtor casually mentioned it bordered a subdivision called Silver Ridge Meadows, but my lot predated their development by decades and sat completely outside their jurisdiction. "They can't tell you what color to breathe out here," she joked, and I believed her. From my porch, Silver Ridge Meadows looked like a copy-paste experiment. 40 near-identical beige executive homes. Lawns so perfect they felt illegal. And according to Henry Walker, the 73-year-old Korean War vet who ran the hardware store, the previous owners of my farmhouse coexisted just fine with the HOA for 50 years. That was before she moved in, he muttered, shaking a paint can. Before Claudia Mercer decided this neighborhood was her kingdom. Claudia Mercer was an insurance middle manager by day, the kind of person who denies claims with a smile, and self-appointed neighborhood ruler by night, running for president of the Silver Ridge Meadows Homeowners Council on a platform of eliminating non-conforming eyesores. Her campaign flyers, somehow stuffed into my mailbox even though I wasn't in the HOA, showed dramatic before and after yard photos with blood-red X's over anything that looked remotely human, and I told myself all I had to do was stay invisible, fix cars, mind my business, let her terrorize people who actually signed up for it. 3 weeks after I moved in, I was under my truck changing oil when I heard stilettos ticking on gravel, sharp and deliberate, like an execution countdown. And when I slid out from under the axle, there she was, Claudia, folder thick as a phone book, smile stretched too tight. "Welcome to our community," she chirped, thrusting a mandatory compliance orientation packet into my greasy hands. Inside were bylaws thicker than a thriller novel, forms for pre-approval of everything from mailbox styles to grass height, and an invoice for annual dues that sure as hell weren't mine. I wiped my hands, trying to be civil. "Ma'am, wrong house," I told her. "I'm not in your HOA." And I watched her expression fracture, the smile freezing, one eye twitching as she whipped out a hand-drawn map that looked like it had been designed during a nervous breakdown, insisting my property fell within their boundaries. So I went inside, grabbed my official survey, laid it across my workbench, pointed to the line. "Your development stops here. Silver Ridge Meadows ends right there. My land starts 15 feet east, and it's been that way since the 40s. For a heartbeat, she just stared, like I'd told her gravity was optional. Then she put on a different smile, colder, more practiced. "We'll see about that. she whispered, and the air felt 10 degrees colder. I should have recognized that as the first shot, but I didn't. I went back to my tools, thinking the worst she could do was talk, not realizing she was about to turn bureaucracy, social pressure, and even the police into weapons, all because one old farmhouse refused to bow. 2 weeks after that showdown, Claudia found her favorite weapon: city bureaucracy. Word reached her that I sometimes fixed cars for neighbors in my garage. Simple stuff: brake pads for the teacher, oil changes for Kelly Ruiz, the single mom nurse next door, and she filed a complaint saying I was running an illegal commercial operation. Soon a thick letter arrived, dripping with legal code, threatening $200 a day fines unless I shut down. What she didn't know was that 20-plus years in the Navy trained me to read regulations like maps. I'd gotten a mobile mechanic license as soon as I left active duty, and I'd confirmed the zoning before buying the farmhouse. So instead of panicking, I called the city myself, invited Inspector Rodriguez out, walked him through my setup, watched him admire the tool wall, check my paperwork, and sign off that everything was compliant. The smell of motor oil and coffee mixing while he said, "You're solid, man." And I knew somewhere across the property line, Claudia's, I was probably twitching. That's when Laura laid down the rule that changed everything. Document it all. Every letter, every visit, every tech reading. Because in her fraud cases, the people who think they're clever always bury themselves in their own paperwork. So we started a binder, then a second one. And while we were busy living, Claudia escalated. She filed a complaint about Laura's department-issued patrol SUV, claiming the police cruiser was a commercial vehicle that made families feel unsafe. Imagine the audacity of telling a detective her car violates community aesthetics. Laura answered through formal channels, provided take-home vehicle policies, stayed professional. But at dinner that night, she cut her steak slower than usual. "She just made this about my badge," she said softly. And that was the moment this stopped being annoying and became personal. Then the neighbors started talking. Henry Walker shuffled over one morning, hands clamped on his coffee mug, telling me Claudia had measured his fence and declared it 2 inches too tall after 15 peaceful years. Kelly Ruiz, with shadows under her eyes, said she'd been cited for leaving her stroller on the porch, unsightly storage. According to the notice, and Laura, being who she is, laid those violations out on the dining table, lined them up by date and address, and the pattern glared back. Working families, veterans, single parents hammered for tiny things while certain pristine streets stayed mysteriously violation-free. Then came social media. Claudia created a Facebook group called Silver Ridge Standards, posting photos of my truck and other offending properties with captions like, "Some folks think rules don't apply," and "When property values become negotiable," trying to turn neighbors into a jury. So I joined, dropped copies of my business license, the city approval, even a photo of my allegedly too tall grass next to a ruler, joking, "Anyone know where to buy tiny scissors for rebellious lawns?" And you could feel the grip of fear loosen a little as people started laughing instead of hiding. Anonymous letters followed, and signed notes on HOA letterhead slid into mailboxes, muttering about declining values, commercial vehicles, and increased police presence making families uneasy. The wording vague enough to sound respectable, pointed enough to be ugly. And when Laura compared them to official notices, same printer, same formatting, she photographed everything, filed an informal harassment pattern, careful to keep her professional role separate, but her eyes wide open. When intimidation wasn't enough, Claudia fast-tracked a new rule. Any exterior modification needed pre-approval, then tried to retroactively apply it to my security cameras and driveway workbench, threatening fines unless I removed them in 48 hours. The bylaws clearly forbid retroactive enforcement, but she was betting most people hadn't read them. So we did, twice, and pushed back. Noise complaints piled up, even after I moved my work start time to 8 a.m. So I installed a sound meter in the garage, logging decibel levels for weeks. My impact wrench came in quieter than the landscapers and garbage trucks. And again, we documented everything. Then Claudia hired a surveyor, suddenly claiming my driveway and work area were 6 inches into common HOA property, a convenient gray zone to shut me down, until Laura pulled our deed and the original plat and found that lot lines seemed to have mysteriously shifted, always in the HOA's favor. One sleepless night with a cold cup of coffee, I dug into public records, checking contracts, payments, management agreements, and that's when I found it. Monthly consulting payments from the HOA to Claudia Mercer, $2,400 a month, plus a flood of overpriced contracts to Mercer and Sons Construction, her brother-in-law's company, landscaping, snow removal, pool maintenance, all neatly under thresholds requiring homeowner approval, reserve funds that should have been around. $400,000 sitting at less than 50. By the time Laura got home, I had financial statements spread across the table. She sat down, said, "Show me the pattern." And we watched it emerge. Emergency contracts, inflated invoices, missing reports, and a harassment campaign centered on anyone who dared question it. Within days, our garage turned into a war room, whiteboards and timelines covering the walls. Daniel Price, the accountant 3 doors down, running forensic numbers and confirming hundreds of thousands effectively siphoned out. Henry bringing old meeting notes that had vanished from official records. Kelly delivering a list of 20-plus harassed families. And Rachel Monroe, a real estate attorney, calmly explaining that what we were looking at wasn't just bad management. It was potential fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. Even my daughter Lily joined in, turning her school civics project into real data, spreadsheets of violations mapped against demographics and board decisions, a pattern of selective enforcement that looked a lot like discrimination wrapped in legal language. And as we prepared for the annual HOA meeting, Rachel drafted a complaint for the state attorney general. Daniel built charts that any homeowner could understand. Laura organized evidence like a criminal case, and Claudia, sensing something, slipping, went scorched earth. Tires slashed on my work truck the same night, our cameras mysteriously cut out, glossy flyers accusing us of harassing the board, a string of bogus 911 calls, and finally, a false report claiming I'd threatened her at the mailbox, a lie that crumbled the second our security footage and GPS data surfaced. When all of that failed to shut us up, she played her last card, took her carefully curated file to the Brookfield County Sheriff's Office, painted me as a dangerous, unlicensed troublemaker hiding behind a cop wife, and convinced 2 deputies to show up at our door, not realizing the badge on Laura's chest and the binder on our table would flip her whole strategy upside down. Back to that morning, 2 deputies on my porch, reading from Claudia's narrative about illegal business operations and harassment of board members, and then Detective Lieutenant Laura Cole stepping into view, the shift in their faces as they recognized her, the realization that they'd been dropped into the middle of an HOA power play masquerading as law enforcement. We invited them inside, sat them at the kitchen table, and Laura walked them through everything: my business license, the city, inspection sign-offs, noise logs, harassment timeline, anonymous letters, photos of slashed tires, and the beginnings of the financial puzzle we were building. She never pulled rank, never raised her voice, just calmly separated civil HOA disputes from criminal law, explained that you can't arrest someone for parking a licensed work truck in his own driveway, pointed to state statutes about selective enforcement and fiduciary duty, and by the time the deputies left, they weren't looking at us like suspects. They were looking at Claudia like a problem, and within days, the story had spread faster than any rumor she'd ever started. HOA president calls. Cops on detective's family, backfires spectacularly. Reporter Naomi Blake from the local paper picked it up, dug into the background, asked uncomfortable questions about missing financial reports and repeated police calls that went nowhere. And suddenly Claudia was on defense for the first time, not hiding behind violation letters and Facebook posts, but trying to justify herself in the harsh light of public attention. The annual homeowners meeting that followed didn't feel like a formality. It felt like a trial. The community center packed wall to wall, more than 90% turnout, folding chairs, people standing along the walls, tension humming in the air. Claudia tried to cling to procedure, gavel in hand, talking about time limits and agenda items. But Daniel Price stood up and reminded everyone that state law required financial disclosure they hadn't received in 2 years. Rachel Monroe backed him, citing statutes word for word, and the room shifted. You could feel the board's grip slipping. When I took the floor, I didn't go in as the guy with the loud tools. I went in as a neighbor who'd been pushed into becoming his own investigator. I laid out the harassment, bogus complaints, retroactive rules, boundary games, vandalism, false police reports, all lined up beside the financial red flags. I told them this wasn't about grass and trucks. It was about power and money. about a board punishing anyone who asked, "Where's our cash going?" Daniel followed with the numbers. Charts showing reserve funds drained, contracts steadily overbilled, massive payouts to Mercer and Sons Construction, and consulting fees to Claudia, all without proper homeowner oversight. Laura explained what fiduciary duty meant in plain English, how using a volunteer role to enrich yourself and target dissenters pushed into criminal territory. Kelly presented a petition for a board recall. Henry read out the list of families repeatedly targeted, and Lily's simple map, violations clustering around working class, veteran, single-parent homes, said the word discrimination more clearly than any speech. Then Rachel walked to the front with a thick folder, looked Claudia dead in the eye and said, "This is a complaint ready for the state attorney general, documenting financial misconduct and harassment. You can resign and cooperate, or this gets filed tomorrow and you answer as defendants." And the silence that followed was absolute. Coffee cups frozen halfway to lips, board members staring at the exits, calculating their odds. The recall vote was brutal, lopsided, and final. The entire board removed. A full independent audit approved. Legal action authorized to recover stolen funds and hold individuals accountable. And everything after that moved quickly. The state attorney general's office opened an investigation. Accounts were examined, contracts scrutinized. Claudia Mercer and her allies faced charges and civil claims. Hundreds of thousands were clawed back through settlements and insurance. Harborline Community management was dropped. Mercer and Sons Construction barred from future HOA work, and a new management firm came in under strict transparency rules. In what still feels surreal, my neighbors elected me as the new HOA president, unanimously. The guy who once swore he'd never live under an HOA now chairing meetings about budgets and bylaws, with Detective Lieutenant Laura Cole leading a financial oversight committee, Daniel Price on audit review, Rachel Monroe on legal compliance, and every homeowner getting clear monthly reports posted online. Old bogus violations were erased, fines refunded, Henry's fence stayed put, Kelly's stroller lived. On the porch without a single letter, my truck parked in the driveway became a sort of symbol that the nonsense was over. We used recovered funds to fix what actually mattered. Reserves replenished, a real community garden built on neglected land, a small playground put up where Claudia once stalked around with her tape measure. And slowly the air changed. The smell of fear and vanilla candles replaced by barbecue smoke, flowers, kids' sunscreen, laughter echoing off houses that finally felt like homes again. Property values even rose. Not because we crushed individuality, but because buyers heard this was a place where the board worked for the people, not the other way around. Sometimes I sit on that porch at 2190 Hawthorne Lane, watch kids playing on the playground paid for with money we clawed back from corruption, listen to the sound of hammers building decks without anyone counting fence slats, and I think about that morning. 2 deputies on my doorstep, the crunch of gravel, Laura's badge catching the light, the exact second the power flipped. And I wonder about all the neighborhoods where nobody pushes back, where people keep paying, keep shrinking, keep hoping it'll stop on its own. So I'll leave you with this. When someone hides behind rules and titles to bully, to steal, to discriminate, is staying quiet really keeping the peace? Or is there a moment where standing up, documenting everything, and risking the fight becomes the only way to turn a street full of houses into an actual community worth defending?